Welcome to Logistics Unplugged. My name is Brian Blalock, and I'm your host, and I'm happy to jump in today to all things logistics. So let's pull back the curtain, take a look under the hood, and have a great discussion. I'm thrilled today to have joining us Jason Lockard, the Senior Vice President of Managed Logistics for BlueGrace Logistics. So Jason, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Good morning.
So listen, Jason, I know today's topic is the Logistics Confidence Index. That's a mouthful, but I'm going to have you tell everybody a little bit about that, tell them what it is, talk to about it. But before we do that, I'm always curious how people wind up in this industry, and it's kind of the "what you want to do when you grow up" speech. And let's take it from maybe the, did we want to be a fireman or superhero, or where did we wind up, and how'd you get here? So tell me a little bit about that.
So my dad, my grandfather, and my uncle we're all LTL drivers, here in Tampa, local city drivers. My father and my grandfather were at AAA Cooper.
Okay.
And so my dad got me a job in 1999 working the dock. I didn't get a forklift. I got a hand truck and a pallet jack. And I got
That's no fun.
the absolute worst trailers ever. But that taught me, I still use that. I still use that knowledge today, especially when we're dealing with some operational things, working with customers on their docks and what's good freight, what's bad freight. I know because I've seen it all.
You moved the good freight with your pallet jack?
Yeah, it's not fun. But I have a lot of respect for the guys that work in LTL operations because there's a lot of moving pieces, and it makes a lot of sense in some of the rules that carriers come out with.
Jason, I think I knew a little bit about that about you, but it does show the amount of respect that you have for some of the people I hear you on the phone with. You know where they've been and what they've done, and you understand what they're trying to accomplish with it. So it's nice to hear that, nice to understand where it came from. So there's the origin of Jason Lockard in the industry.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
One thing we've had on a lot of these is we've talked about music and logistics, right? What's that trucking song? And what's interesting is you and I did a session not too long ago where we talked about that. So I don't want to tip my hand to the audience on that, but tell us what your favorite trucking song is.
Well, it's Eastbound and Down, just like everybody else. Grew up watching Smokey and the Bandit, so that song kind of stuck with me.
I love it. And what's funny is that's I think that does have to be our hands down winner because that was mine, that was yours. Yeah. We've had a couple of other guests that have gone that road. But one thing I do know is our chaotic world of logistics, it makes you need an outlet. And I know a little bit about you, so I know one of your big outlets is fishing. So I thought we'd take a minute and go down the road of maybe your best fishing spots. If you want to throw in a good fishing story. Well, we won't give it to everybody else, but you don't have to be geographically accurate. But tell us a little bit about your fishing spots, maybe a good fishing story. And I'm gonna also stick with that music theme a little bit. And if you got any tunes you like to listen to on the boat when you're fishing, let's hear a little bit about that too.
Sure. Yep. Well, this all kind of ties together how I got started in the industry. Starting back in the early 80s, we spent a lot of time fishing the Gulf, spent a lot of time on the water. Back then, the technology wasn't anywhere near what it is today. So if we got, 15, 20 miles offshore, that was kind of a regular occurrence, and did a lot of bottom fishing for grouper and snapper. And so that's where any chance that I can get, anytime there's a weather window, that we're getting offshore. We're typically going 100 to 130 miles out of Tampa.
Wow.
Fishing for deep water grouper, snapper, and the deep water jigging's really become popular lately, and that's what we've been really focused on.
Would you say the technology for finding those suckers is a little better today?
It's a lot better. Although the weather forecasts are pretty much the same accuracy, I feel like. Yeah.
So 100%, right? They're always right.
It's 100%, 70% of the time, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's very generous. Well, I guess that 30%, if we're going to talk about our world here, that 30% is where you have to be prepared, right? And that's the same reason you have your team is the 30% to be prepared for when things don't go as projected in the industry. And that's a great transition to kind of take us into the topic. And tell everybody what the LCI, what the Logistics Confidence Index is, and why we put that together.
Yeah, so what's different about it, unlike other indices, is that it's not a historical record of data that we're using to make a future prediction. It's a customer sentiment or customer opinion on what they think the next quarter is going to look like for three primary metrics: revenue, inventory levels, and order volume. So pulling fishing back in, when we do these trips offshore, it's typically an overnight. It's typically 100, 130 miles offshore. we are looking at weather forecasts a week in advance, 2 or 3 days in advance. Depending on what that looks like will dictate what kind of gear we take, what kind of bait we take, what kind of tactics we're going to use, all the way down to who's going to be on the boat. Because if I know you get seasick easy and it's going to be rough, you're probably not going to get the text.
He really eyeballed me on that one, just so you guys know.
And that I think that's similar to our Logistics Confidence Index in a way that it doesn't predict the future to 100% certainty.
Yeah.
None of these really do. Everyone's got a crystal ball. I've been to several conferences so far this year that some were green shoots and everything's unicorns and rainbows, and some it's going to be exactly the same. And, so I think paying attention to these is important. I think this is an important tool in the tool belt, but combine that with other things and have a backup plan.
Do you find it hard when you see all this data thrown together, from the unicorns to the everything in between, to not bias yourself to what you already thought before?
What was that saying?
go
Clock's right. A broken clock's right 2 times a day.
Yeah.
Right? So somebody's going to be right eventually. They keep pushing it out there, right? But I think what's unique about this is taken from our customer base.
Yeah.
And so these are clients these are not just transactional clients either. I mean, some of them have been with us for many, many years, and so we have very tight relationships with them, and they want to share this information with us because they want us as a partner to be aligned with their growth goals or their cost saving goals or their efficiency goals. And so this is a topic that's always taking place in QBRs. We just felt like, this is good data. We might as well share it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we'll just pull the curtain back a bit, and we'll talk about right now and what you are seeing. But before you do, we had talked a little bit about having some examples of where the ability to be a little bit more predictive with some of the information that you see has helped drive some of the decisions or choices that you've seen in the market. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you've got something that you feel good sharing with us about that.
Yeah. It's not showing it in the data here because it's only been a handful of customers that are impacted by tariffs here recently. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a big pull forward in inventory for especially that out of Canada. And that's even we're being seen right now in terms of what the rate per mile for that lane right now is. It's very difficult to find capacity because everyone's trying to get ahead of that and everyone's trying to pull forward inventory. We've seen pockets of that as well. But based on the overall consensus of all of our customers, what the index is telling us for inventory is that it's still the no drastic strategy shift in terms of how we're going to maintain inventory levels. It's still this wait and see.
Well, I guess wait and see is better than panic and correct, right? So at least we're not going too crazy with it. So let's talk a little bit about the revenue growth that you're hearing from the customers and what their expectations are and what you think that means. And I want to take this, not just the shippers, not just the logistics companies, but even talk about what you think that might mean to the consumer, to the person that's on the other side of those transactions. I know that's a little crystal ball-y, and we already did the 70-30, and we probably get a little worse than that when we get to that level, but I want to make sure there's something for everyone on this.
This does kind of show some green shoots. There's more positive sentiment on the revenue side.
Okay.
We're expecting this to be a leading indicator that if this continues consistently being more positive, that inventory is going to follow.
Okay.
And it's not significant. It's a couple points in the right direction, but I think that our customers are confident that revenue levels will be slightly better than they have been in Q2, this coming Q2 25, than they have been for the last couple quarters.
That's great. And on the flip side, on the customer side, is there a way to draw a parallel to what you think that means in terms of the potential for cost or anything at the consumer level?
I think the main cost controls are still a number one priority for all of our customers. I think all the big stuff been done over the last 2 years, 2.5 years.
Yep.
The big projects have been scoped, have come through execution, and we're seeing the ROI on a lot of those. And so the big stuff, the low-hanging fruit, we've already seen that happen. So now we're just in this let's maintain phase. We have to maintain service levels, and if you cut too deep, then you start to sacrifice service. That impacts revenue. So I think we've met equilibrium on that for a lot of our clients.
So at least nothing in your mind that looks bad on the pricing front.
Yeah.
If anything, we could be heading in the other direction.
There's always opportunities, and that's where we have to keep our saw sharpened. We have to constantly look for new opportunities in that. But we've gotten to a point where there's enough stability or enough consistency in most of our clients' supply chains where the peaks and the valleys are not happening as often, which makes it a lot easier to come up with interesting ways to reroute freight or to consolidate or to pool. When you have enough consistency, you can do that. When we had the crazy stuff, in 2021 and 22, it's very difficult to do those things.
No, that makes perfect sense. And you kind of are taking me down a road I wanted to talk about, because I know this is a right now discussion about what you see in the current index, but when things don't go quite like we plan for them to be, when the annual budget's not in alignment and the markets do have those unexpected shifts, what are some of the strategies that you've seen to help a company? And you mentioned a little bit about it, do things differently, I guess is a good overall theme. But talk to me about some of the strategies to meet the budget when that alignment's not quite there.
Challenge the status quo. And that's not always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
When you have data to back it up and you have examples of what we've done for other clients that were in that same situation, you do get a little more backing, a little more willingness to change. And so this concept of nothing's off the table. Let's throw everything on the table, prioritize and execute what has the biggest ROI and what has the highest chance of success.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I don't mean normal transportation type things. I'm talking about upstream business processes with our clients. Systems, redundant systems or redundant processes, really just using the transportation data that we have to help drive business process change.
I like it. So it's kind of the logistics version of that fish finder, trying to figure out where those sweet spots are and how to meet them. And I know that you said you don't see that being where we're at right now, that things are a little bit status quo, which is kind of good. But talk about when inventories aren't there and we've got to make rapid decisions to try to change that. Talk about some of that strategy.
We've seen that a more conservative approach to inventory management and has sort of led to some supply chain inefficiency. So a more conservative inventory approach means, especially when you have multiple locations that you're shipping points from, that you may run out of that certain product in one of your DCs, and there's either a lot of transfers happening, to replenish without having to place another PO with that supplier. They're moving things around inside their network, which is costly, or they're shipping from that location, which may not be the most cost-effective place to ship from. Yeah. And so there's more miles that are happening. We've seen quite a few clients that had lower order volumes or lower order weights, and so that also increases the cost per pound or freight as a percent of that order value. And so the offset of that is didn't have to buy a whole bunch of inventory. We're just still going through the stuff we have, and we're not having to put out that big capital expenditure. But the negative side of that is you're spending more money to move it around inside your network or get it to the customer.
For sure. And I know a supply chain, when people use that term, there's so many components from sometimes it's something that had to grow, something that had to become a part, get to a manufacturer, get put together. So that it's so large and cyclical that a correction is not a immediate thing, right? So that's why the planning and the strategy and all these pieces around it. And then you get into that 30% that, what happens when it's wrong. So it's nice to know that there's always a way or always an appetite to make corrections in the best way you possibly can, right? So I'm going to get a little bit off topic, if you don't mind, because I know you know a little bit about this, you know a lot about this. And when there's challenges to a market, and there's times that we have to be a little bit more creative. I know that you've got technology that's deployed to be able to look at things not just from when you're talking about your supply chain, looking at things that are traditionally created shipments, but looking at things from the order level out and making better decisions. So talk to us a little bit about that. Talk to us about how we can look at an ERP system, look at what's got to get to the customer and figure out a better way to do it.
So we can leverage EVOS software to come up with that perfect load plan, but the real power is honestly challenging the business rules that get us to that order.
Yeah.
And what are the expectations that were given to our customer when that order was placed?
Yeah.
We have a lot of clients that are just in time, and that's their business model. Doesn't necessarily work very well for them because that's their go-to-market strategy. That's their business model. They're taking orders all the way up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Not a lot I can do with that. But For customers that don't have that type of relationship, and there's a lot of blanket POs or planning in the future, setting expectations on when they're going to receive that product, and then backing into ways to change lead times on the customer's order to them allows us more time in that window to consolidate. And the more you consolidate, the lower your costs are going to be. And so the software is very powerful, but it's the software telling us our current state and us challenging that status quo and challenging those types of parameters upstream of in the order cycle is really where we find the most savings.
Yeah, I love it. And I don't know if you even remember this, but you taught me something a long time ago. Jason, I remember we were looking at an individual that was working with a different company in our industry, and business rules is an interesting term that you called out. They had a business rule through an integration that basically said when the DC that something is ordered from had a deficit of inventory, they ordered it from the one with the greatest surplus. And I've probably said this now 1 million times in the last 10 years. That might be the dumbest business rule ever created because they forget that warehouses get replenished, that maybe you shouldn't ship something from the East Coast to the West Coast just because you don't have product sitting in the West Coast.
We had another one that was the order would ship from the location that the sales rep was located at.
That makes perfect sense.
And they didn't have territories. So
Lord.
Sales rep in Tampa could sell something to somebody in California, and they had a DC in California.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Right? So it's nice to have technology, and technology is an important part of any solution, and it's where you scrape this information together and where we can make some of the decisions that we make. But it's nice when somebody's reviewing that technology and putting some rules and some business sense behind it. And it's always nice to know that there's ways to correct what technology might have us do if we didn't step in front of it. And I know we talked a little bit about fluctuations in orders. The economy drives a lot of that, right? Mm-hmm. We're not trying to pull the crystal ball out and understand that to any level of certainty, but you are talking to our partners. We are understanding, what their orders are looking like in those fluctuations. And talk to us about how the growth of revenue or the decreasing of orders can ripple down into the supply chain, even at the mode level.
So the order metric is volume of orders, number of orders.
Right.
So when I see revenue increasing and orders staying flat or slightly decreasing, that to me indicates that we're getting back to higher order quantities, which is a good thing.
Okay.
That means more products on fewer shipments, hopefully traveling fewer miles. That typically is very healthy for a customer, for a shipper.
Right. Absolutely. And that kind of goes into where we started some of this, which is we want this to be something that resonates with everyone, even if you're the guy that has to walk in the store and buy the thing that we got there, right?
Yeah.
So making sure that's control and making sure that we find ways to decrease the landed cost or the cost to actually get those goods to the market, that at some point becomes a way for us to help drive down the cost of goods, right? And that's got to feel good to everyone. So it's nice that
we've got a big LTL customer base, as well as truckload. Truckload, that went racing towards the bottom much faster than LTL.
Right.
Because a lot of those customers that were ordering full truckload quantities of product from our customers didn't need it anymore. I don't need 20 skids of that product. I need 5.
Right.
And so still getting orders from that client, from that customer, but it's now turned into LTL. So a lot of that business that have fallen out of truckload volumes have moved into LTL over the last couple of years. And so you've seen that in the financial reporting of a lot of those publicly held LTL carriers, is that they've weathered a storm pretty well because a lot of that volume has shifted down to them.
Yeah. So not so good for some of the truckload
not so
providers.
Good. Yeah.
And the LTL gets to continue to flourish. And of course we want them to, but it'd be nice if the truckload carriers were able to flourish along with it, because in general that means the economy's healthier, and that's exactly what all of us want. And being able to kind of pull the curtain back and understand every customer doesn't have a strategy in place when all you've done forever is one thing. And then now you've got to be able to be flexible about modes. You got to be flexible about how you do things. And I'm guessing that's the reason that when that 70-30 weather report comes in and things are wrong, you have to have a team in place to be able to be flexible about how things get to market.
Got to adapt. If we were planning on going northwest to this special spot I got up there, we catch a wahoo almost every time, and it turns out to be not the greatest day up that way, and we got to be able to make an adjustment. Make sure you have enough fuel to do it. Make sure you have enough time left, to be able to pull those things off. And so there's a lot of similarities to draw between those two things.
I like it. I feel like I might have gotten Mr. Miyagi in here helping me with it. I just waxed on and waxed off freight. I now understand it completely. So, since you did take us back to fishing, Jason, before we kind of wrap things up today, I didn't want to let you escape. I know you gave me your trucking song. That's great. So I want to hear what tunes when you're out on the water you want to hear.
Stick figure.
Okay. So I'm guessing that's music. Tell us a little bit about that.
They've been around a while. I think 20 years. I think 2005 is when they came out with their first album. But it's sort of a 311 Sublime reggae. They're just a great band.
Okay. So for me at 100 years old, that'd be my Jimi Hendrix, but, or even Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah, it's great boat songs. You could put them on shuffle all day long, and you don't get tired of it.
I like it. So another thing I don't get tired of is good planning, good success, and good information. And Jason, I appreciate you sharing that with us here today. Are there any little last-minute piece of advice that you can give to the shipper side, because I know a lot of those are the ones listening to us, that they could do as a takeaway based on what you see in the market now, and then we'll let that be a wrap?
It goes back to challenge the status quo. So my favorite thing to hear when we're engaging with clients is, well, that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
That usually indicates an opportunity. And so we like to pick at those. I really do believe back half of this year is going to look promising. This is kind of an early indicator, seeing revenue sentiment being more positive and orders down. That to me tells me that we're going to start getting more orders from the same customers, or heavier orders, or higher quantities. And so if that's the case, then we're looking at our procurement strategy to make sure it aligns with that. And so it's something that we talk to both at a strategic level, but also at a tactical level. It's really getting in the weeds and understanding the carrier base that we have in place, and understanding service levels, and being very surgical where we can. And so don't just look at the really high level metrics.
Right.
Really try to dig into what's driving those.
Great advice for everyone. And the piece I'll take out of that too is from what I'm hearing from you, Jason, is don't just look at trying to find a way to do what you're doing now cheaper and think that's going to be the solve. Sometimes you got to be open to doing it differently. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So, hey, listen, that's a wrap. This was great. Jason, I learned something every time we talk. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the listeners. And pick us up next Tuesday. We'll have something new for you.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.